Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Phantom Surgeon, an Honoring Audiobooks original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Act 1, The Whisper of Steel. London, in the early months of 1895, sat beneath a thick blanket of fog so dense it seemed to muffle the very heartbeat of the city. The gas lamps along Baker Street flickered dimly through the haze, casting long, slanted shadows across the cobblestones. It was an unusually silent morning, and in the parlor of 221B, the fire crackled as if unwilling to let the chill settle fully. Sherlock Holmes stood at the window, pipe in hand, peering into the gray void beyond. His sharp profile, hawk-like and still, was outlined in the dim light. Dr. John H. Watson sat in his armchair, a copy of the Lancet open in his lap, though he had not read a line in several minutes. "You hear it too, Watson?" Holmes said suddenly. Watson looked up, startled. "Hear what?" "The silence. This city hums constantly, even at this hour. Yet today it is as if London holds its breath. A curious omen, would you not say?" Watson closed his medical journal and set it aside. "You may call it intuition. I call it the weather." Holmes turned from the window and walked to the mantel, tapping his pipe against a porcelain dish. "Weather is but the surface of a deeper current, my dear fellow. And speaking of deeper currents," he paused, eyeing the Morning Post that had just arrived. "Let us see what news drifts in with the tide." Among the usual correspondence, bills, inquiries from eccentric patrons, and an invitation to a disreputable salon, Holmes picked out a thick envelope, the paper watermarked with the crest of the Royal College of Surgeons. He slit it open with a silver knife and scanned its contents. His eyes sharpened, his posture straightened. "Watson, have you any acquaintance with Sir Evelyn Mordaunt?" Watson blinked. "The industrialist? I met him at a hospital charity banquet last year. A formidable man. Why?" Holmes held up the letter. "He was found dead in his private study last night. The circumstances are enigmatic. No wound, no sign of violence. He had been recovering from what was described as an elective surgery, a minor, unnamed procedure." "Surely not unusual for a man of his wealth," Watson replied. "The idle rich are always seeking some fashionable new tonic or operation." "True. But what makes this notable is that Sir Evelyn was the fifth such man to perish under similar circumstances in the last 3 weeks. Watson leaned forward. "You suspect foul play?" "I suspect an invisible scalpel, Watson." Later that morning, Holmes and Watson arrived at the Mordaunt estate in Kensington, a grand townhouse adorned with iron gates and ivy-draped brickwork. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard awaited them on the steps, his brow furrowed. "You're late, Holmes," Lestrade said, though without much conviction. "Punctuality is a function of necessity, Lestrade, and we had none until this moment," Holmes replied as he swept past into the house. Inside, the drawing room had been preserved as it was the previous night. Sir Evelyn's body sat upright in a leather armchair, his expression strangely peaceful, his skin pale but otherwise unblemished. Holmes approached the corpse with reverence, his eyes flicking rapidly from the man's face to his hands to the folds of his clothing. No signs of struggle, no visible trauma. Rigor has set in. "Time of death consistent with the hour noted in the constable's report," Holmes murmured. "Heart failure?" Watson offered tentatively. "Perhaps. But look here. His fingernails show faint bruising. Cyanosis, suggestive of respiratory compromise. A reaction to anesthesia? An astute hypothesis, Watson. But that leads us to another question. Who performed the surgery?" Lestrade cleared his throat. His valet reported he was recovering from a rejuvenation operation. "Thus, something private. Not on any medical record. No doctor has come forward." Holmes turned on his heel. "Then we must go to those who do not dwell in the light. The underworld of medicine, Watson, and we shall begin at the Shardlow Infirmary." Shardlow Infirmary, tucked behind the soot-stained alleys near Whitechapel, was an open secret. Officially closed due to funding shortages, it now operated in shadow, treating the city's poorest for coin, bread, or barter. It was here that Holmes believed whispers would take form. They were met by Sister Agnes, a grim-faced nun with sharp eyes and a surgeon's steadiness. "Mr. Holmes, we are not accustomed to your kind here." "Nor mine to yours, sister," Holmes said smoothly. "I seek knowledge, not absolution." She led them through dim corridors until they reached a room with peeling walls and the scent of iodine. "People speak of a phantom surgeon," Holmes said, "operating outside the law. A miracle worker. Do you know of such a man? Agnes hesitated. There are many who claim miracles, fewer still who deliver them. And yet, some have died soon after receiving them. Her eyes darkened. They come here sometimes, men and women with strange scars, dazed expressions. They never say where they've been. But we see things, unusual incisions, internal damage with no external sign. We called it the touch of Lazarus. Watson raised his brows. Resurrection, then sudden death. Macabre. Holmes leaned in. Sister, I need names. Anyone who might have spoken of their experience. She hesitated again, then pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. This man. He came here last week, disoriented and feverish, claimed he had been remade. The name on the paper was Horace Greevy. Holmes and Watson tracked Greevy to a rundown boarding house on Tenter Street. The landlady, a stout woman with a smoker's rasp, pointed them upstairs with a grunt. They knocked. From within came a shuffle, then silence. Mr. Greevy, Holmes called. We are here to help. The door creaked open. Horace Greevy was gaunt, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his hands. I thought they'd come for me, he whispered. Holmes stepped in. Who, Mr. Greevy? The man sagged onto his bed. He said he could fix me. My lungs, bad from the factory air. He said he had a way to make me breathe like a child again. No scars, just sleep and wake up new. Who was he? Never saw his face. Came in the night, voice like silk and vinegar. I woke up in my own bed. Felt amazing at first. Then the pain began. Watson examined him briefly. Lung collapse. This is no healing. It's a death sentence. Greevy clutched Holmes's arm. He said I was a prototype. Said he was testing. He kept notes. Diaries. Under the floorboards. Please, take them. Holmes pried up a loose board. Within lay 3 small journals, bound in dark leather. You've done well, Mr. Greevy. Rest now. As they left, Watson looked troubled. A phantom with surgical skills and a god complex. Holmes nodded grimly. A surgeon not of flesh, but of ambition. We have found his shadow. Now we must find the man. The gray dawn had given way to a sepia-toned morning, the fog still reluctant to lift from the streets of London. Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the taste of death still clinging to our coats when a thin knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a tall, stooped man, plainly dressed but with a precise neatness that belied humble means. Dr. Elphinstone Rooke, the man introduced himself as he bowed stiffly. Gentlemen, I come not merely as a physician, but as a man haunted by a shadow stalking the very edges of our profession. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. A poetic preface. Do take a seat, Dr. Rooke. I've been following the cases, the doctor began, settling into the armchair. 4 dead in less than a month. Sir Charles Bellingham, Lady Tressa Farnsworth, Mr. Gideon Platt, and most recently, Mr. Whittaker. All well-connected. All patients. Patients? I asked. Of yours? No, Dr. Watson, but I've seen the surgical incisions. There are none. And yet, there is no doubt in my mind they were altered. Holmes leaned forward. Explain, doctor. Rooke's face darkened. Autopsy reports are inconclusive or sealed. But one body, Sir Charles, was briefly transferred to the medical college at Barts for examination under an alias. I was present. The internal organs, he paused, they were subtly changed, rearranged, as though someone had attempted a radical procedure of unknown purpose. The tissue showed signs of trauma, precisely excised, sutured internally. Nothing visible on the exterior. Holmes steepled his fingers. A ghost in the flesh, no entry wound, no scar, and yet the organs have danced. A phantom surgeon, as the press has begun calling him, Rooke muttered. Some of my colleagues dismiss it as nonsense, but I believe, no, I know, this is no charlatan's tale. Someone is operating in secret, and with knowledge far beyond the realm of accepted science. I had not yet connected the victims in any medical context, Holmes said, rising to retrieve a slim ledger. But this shifts the constellation of facts entirely. He opened the ledger. Lady Farnsworth was treated for hysteria. Sir Charles had recent fainting spells. Mr. Platt, yes, suffered from what was termed an enlarged spleen, though the diagnosis was speculative. All plausible candidates for treatment should one seek them out with enough persuasiveness. I glanced at Holmes. But there were no official hospital records, no surgeries recorded. Exactly, Watson, and that makes this case devilishly compelling. Holmes turned to Rooke. Tell me, doctor, do you know of any physician recently removed from practice? One with an unorthodox approach, a grudge perhaps, or a fixation on experimental surgery. Dr. Rook hesitated. There was. A former surgical prodigy, Dr. Percival Channing. Brilliant, unnervingly so, expelled from St. Bartholomew's 5 years ago. What for? I asked. Unethical experimentation, Rook said quietly. They say he attempted to graft tissue from a cadaver onto a living patient. There were whispers of more. The case was buried to avoid scandal. Where is he now? Vanished. Some say he fled to the continent. Others that he went underground, quite literally. He was obsessed with something he called internal resonance, a theory that organs could be tuned like instruments to prolong life or even manipulate emotion. Holmes's eyes flashed with eerie delight. Now that is the sort of madness that breeds murder. Rook looked uneasily toward the window, where fog still clung like gauze to the city. If Channing has returned, he would need access to resources, an operating theater, assistance, supplies. Black market medicine, I murmured. Holmes nodded. We must descend into the underworld of London, Watson, the alleys where pain is currency and anatomy is business. By late afternoon, we found ourselves amid the noxious crawl of Brick Lane. The place stank of oil, sweat, laudanum, and stale tobacco. Our destination, the Ninefold Lantern, a known haunt for all manner of men who worked outside the scrutiny of the General Medical Council. Inside, dim lanterns cast trembling shadows against cracked walls. We were ushered into a back room by a hollow-eyed boy of no more than 10, whose limp bore the telltale signs of a poorly set femur. Holmes spoke in a low tone. We seek information. We pay in sovereigns. And we remember kindness. A hunched man emerged from the gloom. His left arm was withered, yet his eyes were sharp. I was once Dr. Hiram Gallows. Now I'm just a peddler of morphine and secrets. Holmes extended a coin. We require both. Dr. Gallows sniffed, fingers darting to the sovereign. Ask? Are there whispers, Holmes asked, of a man performing secret surgeries? Unregistered, skilled, possibly brilliant, possibly mad. Gallows's face went slack. There is such a name. They call him the Ivory Hand. No one sees his face, but those who wake under his blade rarely wake for long. Where does he operate? Nowhere you'd walk in daylight, beneath the old anatomical theater at Blackfriars. Condemned decades ago, flooded, haunted, but not empty. Who protects him? No one dares. He's kept alive by fear, not loyalty. But some seek him. They call it the Covenant of Renewal, a cult of body purity and eternal life. Rich men seeking second chances. Holmes turned to me. That's our next step, Watson. Into the dark. True, but what makes this notable is that Sir Evelyn was the 5th such man to perish under similar circumstances in the last 3 weeks, Holmes said, his voice growing sharp with intrigue. I frowned, suddenly alert. 5 deaths? All under the guise of medical treatment, Holmes nodded slowly. All prominent, all private patients. All having undergone surgeries of an undefined nature, and all expiring without apparent cause. The press, of course, whispers about a new strain of illness, or worse, some plague of the upper class, but I find myself disinclined to such hysteria. And now you suspect murder? Holmes turned to me with a rare gravity in his eyes. No, Watson, I suspect something altogether more surgical. He stood abruptly and fetched his coat from the stand. Come. We are expected at the Mordaunt residence. It would be criminal to let the trail cool. The Mordaunt townhouse was a grand affair, a white-columned facade half-shrouded in ivy, behind wrought iron gates that clanged ominously shut behind us. The butler, an emaciated man with trembling hands, led us to a drawing-room heavy with dark oak and older secrets. Inspector Lestrade stood beside the hearth consulting a notebook. He looked up, not entirely pleased. Holmes. About time. Lestrade. Holmes greeted with a polite bow. Still hunting for the obvious while the improbable slips by? Lestrade scowled. You'll find no murder weapon here, if that's what you're implying. That's because there was none. Holmes approached the armchair in which Sir Evelyn's body still rested, upright, composed, almost asleep. I leaned in beside him, instinctively checking the skin for any signs of puncture or incision. No lacerations, no bruises. No external trauma of any kind. Holmes lifted the edge of Sir Evelyn's dressing gown with his fingertips. There, just below the ribcage. Do you see it? I peered closer. A faint discoloration, subtle, like the shadow of a shadow. That could be lividity, I muttered. Or it could be the trace of something more clandestine, Holmes said. A point of entry, perhaps. One so precise it leaves no mark discernible to the average eye. Lestrade grunted. "You're saying he was operated on without incision?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He stood, his eyes fixed not on the body, but on the side table next to it. A leather-bound journal rested there, its pages splayed open. "Watson, take a look at this entry." I leaned in and read aloud, "February 3rd, pain is lessening. The man assures me the method is sound. No scar. A marvel of modern science," he said. "I feel oddly awakened." Holmes nodded. "He refers, no doubt, to his phantom surgeon. Whoever he is, he convinces these people to undergo treatment with promises of innovation. But their reward is death." Lestrade snapped his notebook shut. "So we're looking for a fraud, a killer masquerading as a physician." "No," Holmes corrected. "We are looking for a physician masquerading as a killer. And that, Inspector, is far more dangerous." Back in the warm familiarity of our sitting room, Holmes was a whirlwind of thought, tossing medical files, news clippings, and private letters across the floor like so many puzzle pieces. "Observe the victims," he said, pointing to a chart he'd hastily drawn on the chalkboard. "All men and women of status, all between the ages of 50 and 70, each suffered from a minor but chronic condition, nothing life-threatening. And each was presumably approached with a miracle cure," I added. "Precisely. Someone is preying on their desperation. Not for profit. None of the estates have reported theft. Not for revenge. The victims are from different sectors. No common enemies. Then what, Holmes?" Holmes lit a match and inhaled sharply from his pipe. The flame illuminated his features like a mask in a magician's theater. "I suspect we are dealing with a surgeon of unparalleled brilliance. Someone disgraced, forced underground. A man who believes himself a pioneer, perhaps even a savior. Testing methods no licensed institution would ever permit." I shivered. "Testing on living subjects." "More than that," Holmes murmured. "Perfecting, refining. This is not merely malice, it's obsession." The echoing halls of the Royal College lay in shadow as we arrived by lantern light, summoned by a certain Dr. Elphinstone Rook, a gaunt man with deep-set eyes and the look of someone perpetually haunted by what he knew. "I appreciate your discretion, Mr. Holmes," Rook said as he led us to a dissection theater. "I brought you here because one of the victims, Sir Charles Bellingham, was briefly delivered to us under an alias. I was present for the examination. What I saw should not exist." He pulled back a sheet covering the lower half of the preserved cadaver. "Look there," he said, pointing with a gloved hand. The stomach cavity had been opened. The organs, perfectly aligned, were subtly, eerily different. The liver has been repositioned, the kidneys closer to the spine, the stomach wall reinforced with what appears to be silk thread, but of a kind I've never seen. "Not just a procedure," Holmes whispered, tracing the sutures with gloved fingers. "A reinvention of anatomy." Dr. Rook nodded. "I believe the goal was not healing. It was transformation." Just as we returned home, a note awaited us, pinned to the door with a scalpel, long, gleaming, and surgical. It read in elegant, precise script. "I do not kill. I improve. The weak die. The worthy endure. You misunderstand me, Mr. Holmes, but soon you will see." The ivory hand. Holmes stared at the blade for a long moment. Then he turned to me with a gleam of cold fire in his eyes. "This phantom walks with purpose, Watson, and we must follow him into the shadows he's carved." Act 2. Into the catacombs. London's underworld is not a place one visits. It is a place that consumes, a subterranean network of secrets, dealings, and decay. If the above-ground city prided itself on order, civility, and structure, then below the soot-streaked bricks and iron sewers festered a chaos equally vast, ruled not by parliament or queen, but by whisper and shadow. It was to this realm that Holmes now turned his piercing intellect. The next morning, long before the sun could burn away the thick winter mist, Holmes summoned me from my sleep with a quiet urgency. "We've an appointment, Watson, with a man who calls himself Mr. Glass." I rubbed my eyes. And who might he be? "An intermediary of sorts, a dealer in information. He operates out of the Lower Marsh district. If there is anyone who knows where the ivory hand has been conducting his operations, it is Mr. Glass." Bundled against the cold, we made our way through the narrowing alleys and crumbling thoroughfares of the South Bank. The smell of stale coal and river brine hung in the air. By the time we reached the Lower Marsh, the cobblestones were slick with the remains of the night's rain, reflecting the flickering gaslight in ripples of gold and soot. We found Mr. Glass in a crumbling apothecary, hidden behind a false wall of musty herb jars and rusted instruments. You'll forgive the secrecy, the man said as he ushered us into a room lit only by a green-shaded lantern. He was thin to the point of spectral, with thick spectacles and unnaturally steady hands. In my trade, the price of openness is often death. Holmes took a seat without invitation. We're looking for someone who operates outside the usual circles of surgery and medicine, a man with unusual skill and no moral tether. He performs procedures that blur the line between genius and madness. Glass tilted his head. And you think I'd be acquainted with such a man? I think you'd know where such a man would go to disappear, Holmes replied, especially one calling himself the Ivory Hand. The name had an effect. Mr. Glass's fingers twitched ever so slightly. I have heard whispers, he admitted. A surgeon working in the tunnels beneath Newgate Prison. The place was shut long ago, but its deeper levels were never sealed. It's said someone has claimed them, turned them into a theater of blood and renewal. The rich go in, some never return. Do you have a way in? I asked. Glass hesitated. There is a sewer line that feeds into the lower cells. Not pleasant, but passable. I can arrange for a guide. Tonight, Holmes said. We descend tonight. That evening, under a moonless sky, we met our guide, a wiry boy no older than 16, called Pym. He led us through a drainage gate behind the ruins of Newgate. The iron bars groaned as they gave way to a black maw. We go slow, Pym warned, and stay quiet. There are things down here besides rats. With lanterns dimmed, we entered the ancient tunnels. The air was fetid and cold, echoing with distant, indecipherable sounds. My boots sloshed through shallow water as Holmes moved ahead, light held steady before him. It's almost beautiful, he murmured, in a grotesque sort of way. I don't share your aesthetic, Holmes, I said. This place reeks of death, which makes it the perfect place for a man obsessed with conquering it. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel narrowed, then opened into a domed chamber that had once served as a holding cell. Now it was transformed. Surgical instruments gleamed on a metal tray. Bottles of chloroform, formaldehyde, and substances I couldn't name were stacked neatly. A marble slab dominated the center, a crude operating table. The walls were covered in anatomical drawings, equations, and diagrams that merged medicine with metaphysics. Holmes approached the slab. This isn't an abattoir, he said softly. It's a laboratory. He pointed to a chalkboard filled with symbols. Look, he's not just operating. He's mapping the flow of life through the body, trying to isolate something he calls the harmonic constant. I frowned. What on earth does that mean? Holmes traced the diagrams with his finger. I believe he thinks the body resonates, like a tuning fork, and that by altering certain organs, he can change its frequency, prolong life, perhaps even cheat death. We turned as a sound echoed from a tunnel. Faint footsteps. Someone's coming, I whispered. Holmes extinguished the lantern. We pressed ourselves into a shadowed alcove. A tall figure entered, dressed in a white coat, his face obscured by a silver surgical mask. He moved with deliberate calm, checking the instruments, writing in a journal, humming an eerie melody. Holmes leaned in close. That's him, the Ivory Hand. The figure paused. I know you are watching, he said without turning. The air tastes of intrusion. We stepped out. Dr. Channing, I presume, Holmes said. The man chuckled. You presume correctly. I had hoped it would be you, Mr. Holmes. His eyes were visible above the mask, piercing, pale, and mad. You see my work and call it murder. But it is rebirth. I've done what your medicine dares not. I've whispered to the soul through the flesh. You've killed 5 people, I said. I liberated 5 vessels too weak to contain the truth. Holmes held up his hand. What is your goal, Channing? To bring balance, to transform humanity. My methods are flawed, yes, but each death brings me closer. There's a difference between progress and perversion, I growled. Holmes's voice turned cold. And there's a gallows waiting for you above. Channing reached for a scalpel. Then you'll have to catch me first. He dashed for the tunnel. Holmes and I gave chase, our footsteps pounding through the maze. But when we rounded the corner, he was gone. Only his laughter echoed behind us. We'll find him again, Holmes said. But now we know he believes himself righteous. That makes him unpredictable and far more dangerous. The silence that followed Channing's escape was oppressive, as if the very walls of the tunnels had swallowed his presence whole. Holmes, ever composed, remained still for a moment, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Watson," he said finally. "He has not fled far. He did not build this place for easy abandonment. He will return." "To kill again?" I asked grimly. "No," Holmes replied, "to perfect his work." He retrieved Channing's journal from the bloodless marble table, carefully tucking it into his coat. "This is our key. If we cannot capture the man, we can at least begin to unravel the framework of his madness." The fire at 221B Baker Street had long since dwindled to embers, but Holmes stood under its dull glow, rifling through the surgeon's journal. I sipped a glass of brandy, trying to shake the chill of those subterranean corridors. The pages were densely packed with diagrams, charts, and scrawled notes in Latin, Greek, and medical shorthand, so elaborate it might have passed for cipher. Holmes laid one page atop the desk and illuminated it under a magnifying lens. "Look here, Watson." He catalogues each of his patients with grotesque clinical detachment. Subject Aurelius, that was Sir Evelyn. Minor cardiac inefficiency, adjusted left atrial conduction pathway via transthoracic insertion. Outcome? Suboptimal. Suboptimal, I repeated bitterly. He speaks of human life as if it were clockwork. Holmes flipped to the next entry. Subject B, Sir Charles Bellingham. Kidneys relocated to subspinal pockets. Liver shrunk using heated silver mesh. Outcome? Promising, but subject expired due to cranial pressure. He was experimenting, testing theories on the living. I shook my head. There is no honor in such ambition. Holmes held up a final sheet, a rough map of London with markings scattered throughout the city. These red marks correspond to the locations where each of his patients resided. But the blue ones, these are not yet known to the police. 5 new addresses, potential future victims. I stood at once. We must warn them. Holmes held up a hand. No, that would only drive him deeper underground. We must predict which one he will target next and be waiting. 3 nights later, we stood outside a tall, elegant townhouse in Belgravia. Holmes had deduced that Lady Aldeth, a reclusive widow with a history of private physicians and a penchant for exotic treatments, was the likeliest candidate. The fog rolled thick as soup across the street, and our breath steamed in the gaslight. Holmes stood in his greatcoat, staring at the house as a footman answered the bell. "We've little time," he said. "If Channing follows his usual pattern, he strikes between midnight and 2 o'clock. Tonight, Watson, we are not observers, we are guardians." We were welcomed by Lady Aldith herself, a pale woman of 60, regal but clearly exhausted. She led us into a study filled with Eastern relics and curious surgical devices, evidence, Holmes noted, of an obsession with longevity. "I received another letter," she confessed, "from a doctor I had never met. He claimed to have perfected a technique to reverse tissue degeneration. He knew details about my spinal degeneration that not even my regular physician was aware of." "Did he name himself?" I asked. "He signed it the Ivory Hand," she said with a shudder. I assumed it was a poetic flourish. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You must act exactly as if you have accepted his invitation. Make no changes to your habits. Let him come." That night, we waited in silence behind a hidden panel in the parlor. Hours passed. Midnight struck, then 1 o'clock. At 1:45, we heard the creak of a window. Holmes gestured for stillness. A pale figure entered the parlor with the poise of a dancer and the focus of a surgeon. He moved directly toward the chair Lady Aldith usually occupied, where a decoy figure in her likeness sat under blankets. Holmes moved like lightning. "Not this time, Channing." But the Ivory Hand was faster than either of us expected. In a blink, he'd hurled a vial of noxious liquid to the floor. Smoke filled the room. He leapt for the window, smashing through it in a cascade of glass. I rushed after him into the alleyway behind the house. Holmes followed, revolver drawn. But again, he vanished into the mist, the echo of his steps swallowed by the sleeping city. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat once more with the surgeon's journal, now annotated and reordered. He tapped the page thoughtfully. "There is a pattern I missed," he said. "These locations form not merely a list, they outline something far stranger." He laid a map of London over the journal's diagram. "See here, each location forms a geometric grid, an anatomical layout superimposed over the city." I stared. "He's recreating a human body, mapped onto London itself." Holmes nodded. Newgate, where he began, was the heart. Aldith's estate, the spine. The next target will be the head. And where would that be? Holmes traced a line. The Royal Society of Medicine. I blanched. That's impossible. It's always staffed, guarded. He wouldn't dare. Holmes smiled grimly. Precisely, which is why he will. 2 nights later, we waited beneath the gallery of the surgical amphitheater at the Royal Society of Medicine, disguised as cleaning staff. Holmes had arranged with Lestrade for all exits to be covered, quietly. No alarms, no patrols, just silence. At exactly 2:13 a.m., a slender man in a white coat unlocked the side entrance and walked straight into the operating theater. Holmes whispered, "Let him begin." Channing placed a canvas sheet across the slab, pulled out tools, and removed from a satchel a strange apparatus of glass tubes, copper rods, and a strange humming device. He worked with ecstatic precision, as if in communion with some divine science. Then Holmes stepped into the light. "It ends here." Channing froze, then smiled behind his mask. "You see now, don't you, Mr. Holmes? The body is a cage. I am merely widening the bars." "You're under arrest for 5 counts of murder?" Lestrade announced, entering with 2 constables behind him. Channing turned slowly. "Murder? No. You will find in time that I was the future, that I offered humanity its next step, but it was too frightened to walk." As they cuffed him, he said one last thing. "There is a 6th, my greatest work. Not dead, not alive, still becoming." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. Holmes sat in the lamplight, reading over the final page of Channing's journal, which had been hidden in a false compartment of his satchel. "It's a name," he murmured, "and a place. Watson, he left someone behind, a patient unlike the others, someone who may still be transformed or lost." "What do we do?" I asked. Holmes stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark omen. "We go to find her." Holmes did not sleep the night after Channing's arrest. The journal, ragged and sweat-stained, lay open upon our sitting room table. He had read it through twice already and was now on his 3rd circuit, each pass slower and more methodical than the last. "The man's mind," Holmes said without lifting his gaze, "is like a cathedral designed by a mad architect. Every corridor leads to wonder and dread." I remained by the fire, my revolver cleaned and my conscience unsettled. "Do you believe what he said? That one of his subjects survived?" Holmes ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "He did not say survived. He said is still becoming. There is a terrible distinction in that." I stood and walked over to the journal. "Is there a name? A clue to where she might be?" Holmes tapped a folded page near the back. "Yes. The entry is cryptic. It reads, Subject F, housed within the chrysalis. Transformation incomplete. Risk of premature emergence, critical. Await final adjustments. Codename Ariadne." He flipped the journal around so I could see. And below it, coordinates. North of the city, an old estate near Hampstead, the Thorn Hollow Asylum. My stomach dropped. That place was shut down a decade ago. Holmes nodded grimly. Precisely why he would use it. Few places offer such exquisite privacy and access to disused medical facilities. We departed just before dawn, traveling in silence. A low mist clung to the countryside like a burial shroud, thickening as we neared the asylum grounds. The great stone building stood like a forgotten mausoleum, its windows shuttered, its gardens strangled by ivy. Holmes stopped at the rusted gates and turned to me. "Whatever we find inside, Watson, I must ask you to remain clear-headed. The woman, Subject F, may not resemble a victim in the way we expect." "You think he's altered her that much?" Holmes's jaw tightened. "I think he tried to make her more than human." We forced the gates open and approached the main structure. The door yielded to a gentle push. Inside, the air was dry, close, and silent. The silence of something waiting. Our boots echoed down the tiled corridors. The asylum smelled of chalk and mildew, the scent of time halted and neglected. In what had once been the surgical wing, we found her. The room was bathed in filtered sunlight through cracked skylights. Machinery hummed softly. A cot rested at the center of the room, surrounded by medical devices wired to glass canisters and pulsating brass engines. On the cot lay a young woman, her dark hair spread around her head like a halo. She breathed steadily, deeply. Her chest rose and fell in rhythm with a slow, artificial heartbeat generated by a large iron pump at her side. Holmes stepped forward, gaze fixed. "So, the chrysalis." Her skin was marked with precise incisions, carefully stitched. Along her spine, beneath a transparent sheath, metal tubing seemed to replace portions of the vertebral column. Her eyes fluttered behind closed lids, trapped in some unnatural dream. I moved to her side. "She's alive." "Yes," Holmes murmured. "But at what cost?" He began inspecting the equipment. "These notes, this machine is designed to regulate her internal systems, not merely to sustain her, to condition her." He was attempting to shift her physiology into something self-sustaining, resistant to illness, possibly even beyond natural decay. I swallowed. "Immortality? In theory, but I see failures even in this. Her body is rejecting the implants. If we do not remove her from this system carefully, she may die." As he said it, a soft hiss escaped from one of the glass canisters. The girl stirred. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He said I would be new, beautiful, a perfect vessel." I took her hand. "You are not his experiment. You are a human being." She opened her eyes, and for a moment they shimmered unnaturally, the irises reflecting light like polished stone. Then she smiled, and her expression softened. "Thank you for remembering." Holmes moved quickly, disabling the machinery with surgical precision. As the artificial systems powered down, he braced the woman's vitals manually, guiding her body to resume natural rhythms. We carried her out just as the sun rose behind the skeletal trees. She clung to consciousness, murmuring fragments of her life before the procedure. A name, Clara Aubrey, daughter of a northern industrialist who had been declared dead 3 months prior in a suspicious boating accident. "He faked her death," Holmes said as we laid her into the cab. "He chose her because she had no one looking for her. He erased her to make her his." "And now," I asked, "she returns to the world. We will see to that." The newspapers printed news of Channing's arrest. They called him the Devil Doctor of Newgate, the White Butcher, the Midnight Surgeon. None of them knew the full story. Holmes stood at the window as the city began its morning dance of carriages and cries. "Watson," he said, "I cannot help but feel we are witnessing the birth of a new breed of criminal." "What do you mean?" "He was not driven by lust or greed or vengeance. He acted in the name of progress. That makes him more dangerous than any Moriarty, because others will follow. Men who believe that science is divorced from morality, that knowledge excuses cruelty." I stood beside him. "And what shall we do when they come?" Holmes's mouth curved into a tired smile. "We'll be waiting." Act 3. The sixth subject. The morning light seeped weakly through the curtains of our Baker Street rooms as I sat beside the bed where Clara Aubrey rested. Her breathing was shallow, her skin an unnatural pallor, and her eyes flickered restlessly beneath closed lids. Holmes paced the room, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Watson," he began without preamble, "observe closely. Clara's vitals fluctuate with a rhythm that is irregular, but not random. It is as if her very heartbeat is attempting to communicate, or perhaps to adapt." I glanced down at the frail woman. "It is a marvel she lives at all after such procedures." Holmes smiled thinly. "Marvel or monstrosity, that is precisely what we must determine." The previous weeks had been a relentless parade of tests and observations. Holmes, with his characteristic precision, set about cataloging Clara's symptoms, cross-referencing them against Dr. Channing's journal. The alterations to her physiology were unlike anything in standard medical literature. Tubes beneath her skin pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow, metal and flesh intertwined in a grotesque symphony of science. It is as though the line between organic and mechanical is blurred, Holmes mused, and this blurring is causing her body to reject its natural limitations. One afternoon, as Clara stirred awake, Holmes and I sat beside her. She spoke softly, her voice a fragile thread. "I dream of corridors, endless corridors, and a man who watches from the shadows. He tells me I am not to die, that I am to become." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Do you recognize this man?" Clara's gaze wavered. "No, but I feel his presence. Always." Days passed, and the strange phenomena intensified. Clara's eyes sometimes shimmered unnaturally, reflecting light like polished stone. At other times, she exhibited bursts of incredible strength, far beyond what her weakened state should permit. And always, the dreams haunted her. Labyrinthine passages, whispered commands, a chilling promise of transformation. Holmes, for all his brilliance, was unsettled. "This is no mere case of unorthodox surgery," he admitted. "It is a psychological crucible, a trial that risks consuming her very soul." The case attracted attention beyond our rooms. Lady Aldith Fairfax visited, her face a mask of concern and curiosity. "I want to understand," she said quietly, "for though I escaped the surgeon's hand, I feel as if I carry his shadow." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. The mystery of the phantom surgeon was no longer simply a matter of crime. It was a profound inquiry into the limits of human nature, the perils of unchecked ambition, and the fragile boundary between life and death. As Clara's condition grew more precarious, a new, darker revelation awaited us, one that would test Holmes's legendary resolve and force Watson to confront the terrifying cost of science without conscience. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the writing desk, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Clara lay propped against the pillows, her dark eyes wide and alert, though a faint tremor betrayed her exhaustion. Holmes sat across from her, pipe in hand, his gaze steady and probing. I stood by the window, watching the fog coil outside like smoke. "Clara," Holmes began, his voice calm but insistent, "you spoke of corridors in your dreams. Tell me, do these corridors lead anywhere? Do you find yourself trapped or wandering?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Trapped, I think, but sometimes I feel I am searching for something. A voice, a light." Holmes nodded slowly. "And this man in the shadows, does he speak to you often? What does he say?" A shiver passed through her. "He says I am special, that I am part of something greater, that pain is temporary, but change is eternal." I stepped forward. "Miss Aubrey, this man, does he look like anyone you know? Anyone from your past?" She shook her head. "No, but his eyes, they are cold. And there's a kindness, too, twisted and cruel." Holmes lit his pipe, eyes never leaving hers. "Do you believe that man to be Dr. Channing?" A flicker of fear crossed her face. "Sometimes. But other times, I think it is something inside me, a voice that is not mine." Holmes exhaled a slow plume of smoke. Voices that are not one's own can be dangerous, especially when the body itself rebels. I moved closer. "You have been through horrors, Clara, but you are safe here. We want to help you." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you, Dr. Watson. But I fear the real danger is not in the surgeon's hands. It is in what I am becoming." Holmes leaned forward, voice lowering. "You speak of transformation. Tell me, do you feel changes? Physical? Mental?" Her eyes narrowed, searching for the words. "Sometimes my skin feels like it is shifting beneath the surface, as if something moves just below, something metallic." I frowned. Could it be an infection? A reaction to the implants? Holmes shook his head. "No infection behaves like that. It is as if her very cells are rearranging themselves, altering." She swallowed hard. "And sometimes I can hear a humming inside me, like a machine running, even when there is nothing there." Holmes stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. Fascinating and deeply troubling. The man was attempting to fuse organic tissue with mechanical apparatus, a precursor to what one might call biomechanical integration. I looked from Holmes to Clara. "Is it reversible? Can she be saved from this?" Holmes stopped beside Clara's bedside. "That is the question. The more I read his notes, the more I fear we may not be dealing with a mere medical curiosity. His work borders on alchemy, the desire to transcend death itself." Clara's voice trembled. "He believed he could grant eternal life. But at what price? I feel as if I am caught between worlds, neither fully alive nor dead." Holmes fixed her with a steady gaze. "And what do you want, Clara? To live? To die? Or to understand?" She looked down, tears brimming. "I want to be free." Watson and Holmes exchanged a look heavy with unspoken resolve. Holmes took a breath, turning his attention back to me. "Watson, we must delve deeper into Channing's experiments, locate any further writings or devices. This girl's survival depends not only on medicine, but on knowledge." I nodded. "And Clara?" Holmes's voice softened. "She must be guarded. Her mind is the battleground upon which this war will be fought." Clara's eyes met Holmes's. "Will you help me?" "Until my last breath," he promised. The fire in the hearth crackled softly as Holmes sat in his favorite chair, pipe resting loosely between his fingers. Clara Aubrey lay in her bed, pale but awake, her dark eyes fixed on some distant vision. I stood nearby, ever watchful. Holmes cleared his throat. "Miss Aubrey, I must ask you more about these internal sensations you described, the humming, the shifting beneath your skin. When do these occur? Are they tied to any particular emotion or time of day?" Clara's gaze flickered to me, then back to Holmes. Mostly at night when the world is quiet. The humming grows louder then. Sometimes it pulses, like a heartbeat, within a heartbeat. And the shifting. It feels like something is stretching and folding beneath my flesh. Holmes's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest. Intriguing. This suggests the implants or grafts are not simply inert, but active, perhaps even self-repairing or adaptive. Have you noticed any changes in your strength or senses? I interjected. You did mention moments of unexpected strength, Miss Aubrey? She nodded slowly. Yes, I feel stronger, but it scares me, like I am becoming something unnatural. Sometimes my vision sharpens, colors brighter, sounds clearer. But then there are times when I feel disconnected, as if I'm watching my own body from outside. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A form of dissociation. The mind's defense against trauma, or perhaps a symptom of the physiological alterations. He shifted in his seat. And the dreams you mentioned? The corridors and the man? Have they changed or evolved? Clara's lips trembled. The corridors twist and lengthen. The man's voice grows more urgent, more commanding. He speaks of completion and ascendancy. I don't understand what he means, but I feel pulled towards some final transformation. I frowned. This final transformation, does it frighten you? Her eyes glistened with tears. More than anything, I don't want to lose myself. Holmes sat forward, elbows on knees. You must understand, Clara, that what has been done to you defies current medical ethics and science. Dr. Channing sought to transcend natural laws, but in doing so, he ventured into perilous territory. Your very identity is at stake. I added gently, but you are not alone. We will face this together. Clara gave a faint smile, grateful but wary. Holmes's gaze sharpened. There is more to uncover. In Channing's journal, he referenced a catalyst, a chemical or device that triggers the transformation. I suspect it may still be somewhere nearby. I asked, if we find it, can it be neutralized? Holmes considered. Perhaps, but we must be cautious. Tampering without understanding could hasten her decline. Suddenly, Clara's eyes snapped open, wide and fierce. I heard it, a voice inside me calling. It says the catalyst is near and that my time is running out. Holmes's jaw tightened. Then we have no time to lose. Later, after Clara had dozed off, Holmes and I sat in the parlor, discussing the implications. Watson, Holmes said quietly, I have never encountered a case where biology and mechanics intertwine so intimately. Channing's work, this fusion of flesh and machine, is the dawn of a new kind of horror. I nodded. And the patients? Are they alive or something else? Holmes leaned back, eyes distant. That is the question. These subjects may no longer be entirely human. Channing's goal was eternal life, but what price is paid for such unnatural survival? I frowned. You think Clara is at risk of losing her humanity? Holmes nodded. Her mind is already fragile. If the transformation completes, she may become something we cannot recognize or control. I sighed. Is there any hope? Holmes's expression softened. There is always hope, but it lies in knowledge and swift action. He pulled a map from his pocket, tracing a route with his finger. The catalyst is likely hidden at Thorn Hollow. We must return there, retrieve the device, and discover how to reverse its effects before it's too late. The following evening, Holmes joined me beside Clara's bed. Her eyes fluttered open, a trace of fear shadowing her face. Holmes, she whispered, what if I don't survive this? What if the completion is death? Holmes took her hand gently. Clara, you are stronger than you realize. We will fight this darkness together, Moise. You are not defined by the scars of the surgeon's hand. I added quietly, and remember, Miss Aubrey, no one is beyond redemption or rescue. A tear escaped down her cheek. Thank you for believing in me. Holmes's gaze was unwavering. The battle for your soul is just beginning. The room was heavy with the scent of beeswax and tobacco, a soft rain pattering against the window panes. Clara lay on the chaise longue, her body frail and still, yet her eyes flickered with a restless fire. Holmes sat opposite her, pipe unlit, studying every nuance of her expression. I stood behind, heart heavy with concern. Holmes spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. Clara, you have borne much at the hands of this rogue surgeon, but now I implore you, speak candidly. Tell me more of these internal sensations, the humming, the shifting beneath your flesh. When did you first perceive them? Her dark eyes met his with wary trust. It began weeks ago, shortly after the procedures ceased. At first, it was a faint vibration, like the heartbeat of a hidden engine. But then the humming grew louder, almost constant. I feel it mostly at night, when the world is silent. Holmes nodded, steepling his fingers. This suggests that whatever implants or grafts Dr. Channing placed within your body remain active, possibly in ways we do not yet comprehend. I added, and what of the shifting? You described it as if something moved beneath your skin? Yes, she whispered. It is as if layers of my flesh ripple and fold, rearranging themselves. Sometimes I glimpse, in a mirror's reflection, a subtle distortion, a shimmer where my skin should be. Holmes's eyes darkened with intrigue, a biomechanical metamorphosis. Remarkable and yet deeply unsettling. The body itself appears to be in rebellion, seeking a new form. She hesitated, then said, At times I feel divided. Part of me clings to the woman I was, the daughter, the sister. But another part, the part that endures the pain and the humming, it is something else. I fear I am becoming a creature that should not exist. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Miss Aubrey, have you noticed any alterations in your abilities? Strength, agility, senses? She swallowed, voice trembling. Sometimes I feel stronger, more aware. My sight sharpens, sounds become clearer, even tastes change. But these gifts come with shadows. I grow distant from myself, as if watching from afar. I regarded her with concern. This dissociation, could it be psychological, a response to trauma? Holmes shook his head slowly. No, Watson. The changes are too profound, too physical. She is undergoing a transformation not just of mind, but of flesh and machine. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I dream often now. Endless corridors that twist and multiply, and a man who watches silently from the shadows. His voice calls to me, telling me I must complete the work, that pain is temporary, and I am destined to transcend death. Holmes's hand tightened around his pipe. This man, the figure in your dreams, is he familiar? Does he resemble Dr. Channing? A shudder passed through her. Sometimes. Other times he is a stranger, cold yet tender, cruel yet caring. I cannot escape him. Holmes's voice softened. Clara, you are caught between worlds, the one you knew and the one he forged, but you are not lost. We shall find a way to reclaim your humanity. I sat beside her, taking her hand. You have endured horrors none should suffer, but remember, you have allies who will not abandon you. She nodded, her grip firm. Thank you, both of you. I do not know what awaits, but I want to fight. After Clara fell into a restless sleep, Holmes and I gathered near the fire, maps and Channing's journals spread before us. Holmes traced a finger along the page. The catalyst, the device or substance that triggers the final transformation, is our key. Channing's notes are maddeningly vague, but suggest it is stored somewhere within Thornhollow. I frowned. The abandoned asylum? Surely the authorities will intervene. Holmes smiled thinly. They are unlikely to search thoroughly. The place is forgotten by most, a husk haunted by memory. We must return, recover the catalyst, and decipher its workings before Clara's condition deteriorates. I looked up. Do you believe it can be reversed? That she can be saved? Holmes's gaze darkened. I believe in science, Watson, but also in the unknown. This is not merely a question of medicine. It is a battle for the essence of her being. The firelight flickered across his face as he added, Channing was a man possessed, not by greed, but by obsession. His vision of eternal life blinded him to the human cost. The next afternoon, Holmes sat beside Clara's bed. The room was quiet save for the ticking of the clock. Clara, Holmes said gently, you once mentioned a voice inside you. Do you believe it is your own, or something implanted, foreign? Her gaze met his. It is both. At times it whispers my own thoughts. Other times it commands me, urges me forward. I fear it will one day drown my own will. Holmes's eyes softened. You must hold fast to yourself, Clara. The mind can be a fortress if the heart remains steadfast. She swallowed. I want to believe that. But what if I am already lost? Holmes took her hand. You are here with us. You are not alone, and we shall fight for your soul as fiercely as for your body. She exhaled slowly, a fragile hope flickering in her eyes. Act 4, The Reckoning. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grimy window panes of our Baker Street lodgings, casting long shadows across the cluttered room. Holmes sat at the desk, his gaze fixed on a yellowed map of Thornhollow Asylum, the site of our next and perhaps final confrontation. Beside him, I organized the sparse belongings we would carry, instruments, medical texts, and whatever might aid us against the unknown. "Watson," Holmes began, voice grave yet steady, "our time has come. The catalyst that accelerates the transformation remains hidden within the asylum's confines. If we do not retrieve it, Clara will be lost to that unnatural fate forever." I met his eyes. "And if we fail?" Holmes's jaw tightened. "Then her soul and perhaps others will be claimed by the phantom surgeon's legacy." We departed that afternoon, the streets of London muffled beneath a persistent drizzle. The journey to Thorn Hollow was somber, the air thick with a sense of foreboding that clung to our coats and chilled our bones. Upon reaching the asylum's gates, ironwork twisted with rust and neglect, Holmes produced a key he had acquired from a former employee, a man who owed him a favor. The heavy lock yielded with a reluctant creak. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of antiseptic long faded. Walls, once white and sterile, now bore the scars of decay. We moved cautiously through corridors where shadows clung like cobwebs, the silence interrupted only by the occasional drip of water echoing from distant pipes. Holmes consulted a tattered floor plan, matching it to the crumbling walls. The surgical wing should be nearby. That is where Channing would have stored his instruments and the catalyst. A sudden noise, a faint scraping, made us freeze. Holmes gestured for silence, hand resting lightly on the handle of his cane, which concealed a slender blade. We pressed forward, senses heightened. After what felt like hours, we reached the operating theater. The room was eerie, bathed in a cold, bluish light filtering through a cracked skylight. Rusted tables and shattered instruments lay scattered. Against the far wall, an iron cabinet stood, its door hanging ajar. Holmes moved swiftly to the cabinet, pulling a small vial from within. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, a translucent greenish hue that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "This," Holmes whispered, "is the catalyst." Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the corridor. We turned, and a figure emerged from the shadows, a man gaunt and pale, eyes wild with fanaticism. "Ah, the detective," he hissed. "I've been expecting you." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Channing?" The man laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "No longer a man, Holmes. I am something more. I sought to conquer death, and now I am its master." Dr. Channing's eyes gleamed with a fevered intensity as he stepped fully into the light. The gauntness of his face was accentuated by deep shadows beneath hollow cheeks, and his once pristine surgeon's coat hung tattered and stained. Yet there was a strange vitality in his bearing, as if the unnatural experiments had altered more than just his victims. Holmes rose slowly from his crouch, eyes locked on the man. "Your madness has cost many lives, Channing, Miss Aubrey included. Why? What twisted creed drives you to sacrifice humanity in the name of eternal life?" Channing's smile was thin and cruel. "You fail to see, Holmes. I am not a villain, but a pioneer. The wealthy elite are shackled by their frailty, doomed to decay and death. I offer them transcendence, evolution beyond mere flesh and bone." He gestured around the room. "These halls once echoed with their suffering, yes. But through their sacrifice, a new dawn arises, a future where death is obsolete." I tightened my grip on my medical satchel. "At what cost? Your subjects suffer horrors unimaginable. You stole their lives to feed your obsession." Channing's eyes flicked toward the vial Holmes held. "The catalyst, it is the key. A serum, an alchemical marvel capable of rewriting the very essence of life itself." Holmes's voice was steady but cold. "And you believe you can control it? That you alone have the wisdom to play God?" The doctor laughed bitterly. "Control? No, Holmes. The process is chaos, but from chaos, creation. Miss Aubrey is the crown jewel of my work, her body a testament to my genius." Holmes's gaze hardened. "A testament to your cruelty, you mean?" Channing's eyes burned with fervor. "I shall not stop until the final subject is complete. Then I shall transcend mortality itself." Suddenly, Clara's weak but determined voice broke through the tense silence. "You won't," she said, pushing herself upright from the shadows near the doorway. Her eyes shone with defiance. "I am the final subject, but I am not your creation. I am my own person." Channing's face twisted in rage. "You insolent girl, you are my greatest achievement. You will complete the transformation." Clara took a step forward. "No, I reject your abomination." Holmes nodded at me, signaling readiness. "Watson, be prepared." The doctor lunged toward Clara, but Holmes was faster. With a swift motion, he thrust his cane forward, knocking the vial from Channing's grasp. The glass shattered on the floor, the catalyst leaking in a shimmering puddle. Channing staggered back, fury contorting his features. "You have doomed us all." Holmes advanced calmly. "I have saved her from your tyranny." Clara's breathing was ragged but steady. "Thank you, Holmes. Watson." I moved to her side. "You're safe now? Clara, we'll see this through." Channing snarled and retreated into the shadows, disappearing through a crumbling doorway. Holmes's voice was sharp. "We must follow him. The nightmare is not over." Holmes wasted no time. "Watson, Clara, stay close. That man is dangerous beyond reason." The asylum's corridors seemed to close in around us as we pursued the fleeing figure. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, as if the very walls conspired to trap us. "Do you think he truly believes in his vision?" I asked, my voice echoing faintly off cracked plaster. Holmes's eyes flickered with grim resolve. Madness and genius often walk hand in hand. Channing is a man broken by hubris and sorrow, a doctor who lost his faith in humanity and sought to remake it in his own image. Clara shivered, clutching her shawl tighter. "I don't want to be a monster. I want to live as myself." Holmes's expression softened. "That is why we fight, Clara, to reclaim your life and to prevent others from suffering the same fate." We turned a corner and halted abruptly. Before us lay a narrow stairwell spiraling downward into the asylum's bowels. Holmes gestured. "This leads to the maintenance tunnels, likely where Channing hid his final instruments." The descent was treacherous, the steps slick with mold and neglect. Our footsteps echoed ominously as we ventured deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. At the base of the stairs, a dim light glimmered from beneath a heavy steel door. Holmes produced a small tool from his coat and set to work on the lock, his fingers nimble despite the chill. Suddenly, a harsh voice rang out from behind. "Stop! You do not know what you are meddling with." Channing emerged from the shadows, flanked by two hulking figures. His loyal followers, faces obscured by gas masks and worn leather coats. Holmes stepped forward unwavering. "Your reign ends here, Channing." The doctor's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can stop progress with your outdated morals? This world needs evolution, not pity." Clara's voice was steady but resolute. "There is no progress in destroying others. Your science is a blight." One of the guards lunged forward, but Holmes and I were prepared. With swift coordination, Holmes disarmed the man, and I subdued the other with a firm grip. Channing's expression faltered, fear flickering beneath his fanaticism. "Enough," Holmes commanded. "Surrender, and you will face justice." The doctor's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. Perhaps I was wrong. But the dream, it called to me. Holmes's eyes held a rare pity. "Dreams are fragile, Channing. It is our choices that define us." As police reinforcements arrived, summoned earlier by our allies, Clara looked to Holmes and me with gratitude. "We've ended his nightmare," I said gently. Holmes nodded. "And now we must heal what remains." The clatter of footsteps echoed faintly as constables arrived, their lanterns casting long beams over the peeling walls of Thorn Hollow. The air felt heavier, yet somehow lighter, as if the oppressive shadow that had haunted these halls was lifting. Holmes stood over Dr. Channing, who was now subdued and bound, his wild eyes dull with defeat. The once obsessed surgeon's facade had cracked, revealing a man broken by his own hubris and torment. Inspector Lestrade, a few paces behind, nodded grimly. "We'll see that this man answers for his crimes, Holmes. His network of fake doctors and illegal surgeries will be exposed at last." Holmes gave a curt nod but said little. His thoughts were with Clara. We moved toward the faint glow of the entrance as dawn broke, pale sunlight creeping through the shattered windows. Clara, still weak but resolute, turned to Holmes and me. "Thank you both for not giving up on me." Holmes's voice was soft. "You possess a strength far greater than you realize, Miss Aubrey. This ordeal has tested the limits of flesh and mind, but it has not broken your spirit." I placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "The journey to recovery will be long, but you will not walk it alone." She smiled faintly, a fragile hope returning to her eyes. Back in Baker Street, Holmes reclined in his chair, pipe lit, eyes distant. I sat opposite, considering the tangled threads we had unraveled. "Watson," Holmes said at last, "the case has shown me the thin line that separates brilliance from madness. Channing's pursuit of eternal life was born of a profound fear. Fear of death, fear of irrelevance." I nodded. "But his methods were monstrous." Holmes smiled faintly. Yes, but there is a cautionary lesson here. Science without conscience can become a weapon. We must always temper innovation with humanity. I glanced toward Clara's room, where soft light filtered beneath the door. Do you think she will ever be whole again? Holmes's gaze was steady. Her body bears the scars of unnatural change, but her mind, her will is her own, and that is what matters most. I felt a weight lift from my chest. Then perhaps hope remains. Holmes raised his pipe in a quiet toast, to hope, and to those brave enough to fight for it. In the quiet of the evening, Clara sat by the window, the city's lights twinkling below. Her fingers traced the delicate bandages along her arm, a reminder of all she had endured. She whispered softly to herself, I am more than what was done to me. I will reclaim my life, my soul. The night stretched on, but within her burned a steady flame, one that no surgeon's hand could extinguish. Epilogue. It was some weeks after the final events at Thorn Hollow that I found myself once again seated in the familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings. The lamps cast their warm glow over the room, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Holmes, as always, was engrossed in his chemical experiments, though his eyes would occasionally flick toward the window, lost in thought. I settled into my chair and began to pen the tale of the phantom surgeon, compelled to record the curious and harrowing affair that had so recently passed between us. Holmes, noting my activity, glanced up and offered one of his rare, contemplative smiles. The case of Dr. Channing, he began, is a grim reminder that human ambition, when untethered by ethics, may lead men into the darkest of abysses. His descent into madness was marked not by greed, as so many others, but by a desperate yearning to transcend the mortal coil itself. I nodded, setting my pen aside. Yet it was his hubris, the belief that he could command life and death, that undid him. Precisely, Watson. It is a tale as old as medicine and science. Progress must always be accompanied by prudence and compassion. The moment we forsake these, we risk becoming monsters in our own eyes. My thoughts drifted to Clara Aubrey, whose courage had inspired even the most jaded of us. Miss Aubrey's ordeal was unlike any I have witnessed. To endure such a violation, and yet retain her very self, it speaks to the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Holmes's gaze sharpened. The human mind is a fortress, Watson. Though the body may be bent or broken, the soul is often more resilient than we can imagine. Clara's spirit was her true sanctuary. He took up his pipe, tapping the bowl thoughtfully. I dare say the true mystery is not the surgeon's methods, but the eternal struggle within each man, between the desire to conquer death and the wisdom to accept it. I sighed, reflecting on the fragile balance we all must navigate. And yet, Holmes, what of those like Channing? Those who dare to challenge the natural order at any cost. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a steely resolve. We must be vigilant, Watson, ever watchful for those who would exploit knowledge for selfish ends. And when the darkness arises, it is our duty to illuminate it with reason, justice, and, above all, humanity. He leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. The world is full of shadows, but so long as there are those willing to seek the light, hope shall endure. As I set down my pen, I felt a profound gratitude for the man beside me, the tireless seeker of truth, the steadfast guardian against the encroaching night. And so ends the case of the phantom surgeon, a cautionary chronicle of science, obsession, and the resilience of the human soul. In these troubled times, may we all remember that no matter how dark the path, it is the strength within that guides us home. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.